Welcome to the American Federation of School Administrators 2020 Summer Learning Series. My name is Lauren Waters Cherry, Secretary Treasurer. We are grateful that each of you are healthy and joining us today for day 2 of 5 exciting conversations that we have thoughtfully planned in response to your asks. AFSA secondly asks your support in a nationwide effort directed at members of Congress meant to raise awareness about the HEROES Act. This legislation is going to provide PPEs, hazard pay, as well as extend current unemployment benefits to essential workers. I'd like to now bring your attention to the Code of Conduct. AFSA is committed to providing an environment free from discrimination and harassment. We ask that all meeting participants to embrace our values of equity and equality and conduct themselves in this meeting consistent with those values. At every AFSA meeting, an officer will assign 2 designees as the first point of contact for anyone who thinks that they have experienced discriminatory, harassing, or otherwise unacceptable behavior. We urge you to contact an appointed designee should you have any concerns. Today's designees are Ms. Florida Woods, our program director. Her email address is woods, W-O-O-D, as in David, S, F, as in Frank, L-O, at AOL.com. And Mr. Nick Spina, our Chief of Staff, N-S-P-I-N-A, at AFSAadmin.org. And you can find that information on your screen. We'd also ask that you, I'm going to review our chat room, usage. And in that, please open your chat windows at the beginning of the training session. At this session, it will be used by all attendees to ask questions that will be addressed by the speakers during the Q&A, which we will host at the end of our presentation. Please enter your questions at any time during the presentation. Also, in the chat room, there will be file resources that can be downloaded as well as speaker presentations. Shortly after this summer learning week, each attendee will be emailed a link to a resource page that will contain downloadable material from all 5 of our summer sessions, as well as links to the recordings of each of those sessions. If you have any technical problems during these sessions, please use the chat window and ask for help. I'd like also for you to please put your phones on mute or silent your phones and keep your microphone muted. So I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to once again to please mute your microphones now. There's one of our participants in which we can hear some background conversation. We'd like to give all of our attention to our dynamic speakers that we have planned for you today. At this time, I'd like to once again welcome you. We're ready for an exciting dialogue. Our title of our topic today is Creating an Equity Agenda, Cultivating Ecosystems to Support the School Community. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Nia Heidel, who has been in higher educational professional for over 20 years, working in academic affairs, enrollment management, intercultural relations, and student affairs. She currently serves as Complete College America's Vice President for Alliance Engagement and Institutional Transformation, where she leads strategic efforts to increase college completion rates nationwide with a specific focus on addressing systemic inequities through reforming advocacy, policy, and practice. Previously, as the Dean for the University College and Director of the Thompson Cook Honors Program at Dillard University, she oversaw the programmatic and assessment components for academic advising, academic enrichment initiatives, student persistence, and service learning for first year and honor students, as well as the university's comprehensive retention efforts and initiatives related to the general education curriculum. Her research interests are in areas of social justice and education, specifically focusing on power and privilege and the responsibility of higher education to educate the community on social injustice. We also have with us, and we're very fortunate to have Daryl Kilbert. He is retired 35 years educator with the New Orleans Parish School Board. In December of 2006, the Orleans Parish School Board appointed Daryl as superintendent of schools immediately following Hurricane Katrina. Currently, Daryl is the vice chairperson of the Black Educators of New Orleans, Louisiana. Their mission is to support Black-led schools to foster enabling legal and regulatory environment for schools to flourish and provide quality education services to students. Beginning in 2016, Daryl worked with the Southern Initiative Algebra Project, where the vision is that every community has a highly quality public education system that ensures the success of each and every child. Please welcome our two speakers today. Dr. Nidell, please. Dr. Hidell?
Yes, good afternoon. How are you all doing? Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to, so I'm having a slight technical challenge. The opportunity to speak with you. I'm very excited to work with AFSA again and to be able to share some ideas that we have around how do we create an environment where we can, our ecosystem, where we can support our students as they are navigating all the different things that are happening currently in our community. And I am trying to share my screen. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, welcome again. And for the next hour or so, Mr. Kilburn and I are going to talk about how do we create an equity agenda, which focuses around cultivating an ecosystem that can support our students as they are navigating the current environment in various different components. All right, so these are our goals. So we have 4 simple goals that we'll try our best to accomplish throughout the next hour or so. One is we want to talk about, have a conversation about what does equity really mean in both the historical and the contemporary context. So what does it mean for our students and for our communities as we are trying to create environments that support our students. How do we create an ecosystem? So we'll talk a lot about what an ecosystem is, because our belief is that these types of initiatives can't happen in isolation, but they really need to happen as a part of a larger project or a larger initiative. So creating the systems and supports that will support students, but also create an environment to sustain the efforts that are put in place. What are specific strategies? Because now we know specifically that people are looking for, how do I move forward? So we have ideas about the things that need to happen, but what are some tangible things that we are able to do in our communities in order to be able to create a positive environment? And then what does an equity agenda look like? So not just talking about it, but really putting our thoughts into action and being able to make a plan for moving forward. So many of us will say, like, why do we even have this conversation? And this, what we're talking about now, is a lot of it is tactical. So this is what we should do, and these are the steps that we should take. And the what is very important as we're moving forward with creating these types of systems and processes. But we also need to think about why. What is the motivation behind why we are engaging in the activities that we're engaging in? Why? What is the purpose, and why do we choose to elevate these conversations now and to prioritize them as part of our agenda of moving forward in this semester and this time? So there's a little video, and we're gonna hope that everything goes well. Okay, so it's a YouTube video, so sometimes that means we have a little bit of advertisement, but here we go.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated.
Nia, if the video is showing in a separate window on your desktop, you may have to share that window separately.
I'm sorry, say it again.
If the video is showing in a separate window than the PowerPoint on your desktop, you may have to share that window separately for the video to be seen. We hear the audio, but don't see the video.
How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, as if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick. If you know which version I'm talking about, just see if that exists. Let me see what you got. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
Okay, 1 second. All right. So, sorry guys. Here we go. Okay. So the reason why that video, I think, because the reason why I really like to show that video is because it helps to recenter. So when you look at that video, you can see the difference when he was understanding what the purpose was. And we're talking about equity, and we're talking about creating these environments where students can succeed and prosper. We need to, I think it's important, I shouldn't tell you what you need to do, but I think it's important that we recenter ourselves and we understand and remember the why and what we do it, because when we understand why we're doing something and why this is important, then the way we walk about it looks very, very different. So the ultimate goal is to create learning environments that supports the needs of all children. And so when we talk about learning environments, from our perspective, we're not only talking about what's happening in the classroom, what's in the school, we're talking about everything that supports that student, that provides an opportunity to grow and to develop. And support looks very different. So when we look at what in a standard ordinary time, what our students need, we have lots of deficiencies across the board. But now when we look at what's going on in our present environment and culture across the nation, things are changing, families have been impacted. What support looks like is going to be very different for the students that we have. So the critical nature of making sure that we are evaluating and assessing the needs of the various types of children that we have in our schools and what their varied circumstances are, and creating environments that provide them the supports that they need in order to be able to succeed. So we have a couple. through, and this one by Helen Keller, it's really about community. So when we think about this, some of these tasks that we have in front of us can be very daunting, right? And so they're just huge. But if we really work together to be able to focus on what the needs are and what our end goal is, then we can really accomplish very much. So when we talk about an ecosystem, by definition, it's a complex network or interconnected system. And so for our purposes, we're talking about ecosystem that really focuses on three different components: the family, school leadership, and instructors. Because again, together, working together, we're able to create the environment that students can prosper. So when we look at classroom instructors, what kinds of supports are we giving them to be in training, professional development, supports that they are able to meet the students where they are? So being able to connect with students, being able to just identify and what the specific needs and concerns and barriers are for the students. With school leadership, what space do they have? How are they organizing their teachers? How are they showing students and teachers and families that they are here to understand and to hear? So working with the school leadership in order to be able to establish expectations in the school and to demonstrate and role model how you might be able to foster these types of environments. And then families. So families are stressed in ordinary times. And so now we have situations that are just exacerbated. But what are we doing to provide families with the tools that they need to be able to address the needs of their students? So when you look at what's happening, I know all of you have experienced this over the last 4 months. You have families who are homeschooling and families who are trying to navigate economic conditions and just all these different things, these stressors. But we can't assume that they know what is needed in order to be able to create an environment and to be able to support their students. So creating a system that identifies the needs and provides resources to people where they are, instructors, leadership, and families, to be able to put a safety net around the students that we're serving. So, and the reality is that there are lots of things out there, but until we begin to really look at what these things are and to name them, it's going to be very difficult for us to make change. So when we talk about creating these ecosystems and creating strategies to combat or to increase equity, then there's some things that are very difficult, some conversations that are very difficult. And some disparities that are just there that maybe we wish weren't there. But the reality is that unless we own it and name it, then we can't ever be able to advance past it. So by definition, equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. And there are lots of conversations now with equity, and we just thought it'd be a good idea just to kind of put this graphic out there to see what we're talking about. So when we talk about equity, it's often confused for equality, and they have a very different meaning. So you'll see in the first one, inequality, I think we see that. So the tree is slanted to the left, one person gets an apple, the other person's like, hey, what about me? So you don't have access to resources, right? And so we see that showing up in the way schools are funded. We see that showing up in the way teachers may be provided with additional resources and support. So we know that exists. Now, equality, the idea is that you give everybody the same thing and they should be able to move forward. So this is that whole concept of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, it assumes that everybody has boots, right? And so this is, so it's a noble concept, but it doesn't acknowledge the fact that there is a deficiency on the front end that makes just giving people the same resources at this point, it doesn't rectify the inequity that has existed or the disparity that has existed. So when we talk about equity, we are looking at how do you retool systems, organizations, schools, instruction, professional development, so that you acknowledge that there is a group that has not been able to take advantage of the resources and things that have been out there before. So you acknowledge this by giving them additional to help to bring them up to speed. so that now they have a little bit extra, so they're at the same point at which we're starting. And then justice, which personally is where I'm always striving to get to. Justice is looking at what are the individual, the systemic barriers that exist within our structures, our organizational structures. So that could be the way we have policies, the way we do funding, the way we do professional development, all those things. What are the structural barriers that exist? And then working to dismantle the structural barriers. So it's not only providing for additional resources, but it's also the idea that you're going to simultaneously dismantle those tools those barriers that do not create an equitable system. And so when we're talking about create an equity agenda, what we're asking you all in your leadership positions is to take a moment to see where is there inequality? So what systems or programs or opportunities exist within your school that provide unequal access? A great example is access to AP classes and dual enrollment. So do all students have an opportunity for that? Or has a decision been made that only certain students, are able to even participate in those activities? So then how do you move from when identifying these structural inequalities to creating a system that you provide tools where every student, every family, every teacher, every administrator is able to benefit and live to their fullest potential because you provided a boost to them. And then I think the next stage is with justice, taking a really, really hard look at the systems that are in place for which you have control or influence, and being able to say, okay, these are things that we definitely need to work on and we need to try to address. And so Mr. Kilbert now is going to talk a little bit about how to create a strategy to narrowing the equity gaps within your schools.
Thank you, Dr. Hydell, and good afternoon to some and good morning to others, depending on what part of the country you're in. That slide that Dr. Hydell just showed, I think says it all about inequities, equities, and what we all should be striving for, and that is justice. But to take it from where Dr. Hydell left off, educational equity isn't about forcing all students in the same direction or the same destination. It's about making sure that all students have access to an educational foundation that will allow each child to reach his or her potential. Too often students are sent to school and put in schools, and those who have the most needs get the least amount of support. Historically, low-income communities are marginalized groups such as African Americans and Hispanics potentially get less than other students from other backgrounds. They get less chance to be taught by highly qualified teachers and less access to rigorous coursework, less opportunity to see their cultural likeness in their teachers and the staff of the schools that they attend. So this is about not only just equity, but also, as Dr. Hydell said, justice. But we're going to look at some clear and strategic ways to narrow the equity gap. First of all, as we move in that direction, one would need to plot a very clear strategy. We're talking about something that is carefully thought through, a strategy with reduction in equity in mind. Too often we have programs and strategies and ideas that we put in place, and there is no objective. The objective needs to be very clear. The objective might be that we improve AP classes, as Dr. Hydell just said, in a particular school. The objective might be to provide resources to students for after-school programs. But it has to be clear, it has to be designated, and there has to be some objective about it that can be measurable. The next thing that we want to do is to hold rigorous standards for all classrooms. You know, students that are provided with an education that will lead them in a direction that is sound, that has standardized policies, regardless of where he or she lives. Too often that we put programs in place based upon where students live, where we think they're going to go, what we think that they need, without having some conversation about what their needs are, talking with the community about their needs, talking with their parents, and even talking to them depending on what age they are. And even smaller children can articulate to you what their needs are. So until we get to the point where we are holding standards for all students in all classrooms and meeting, and not necessarily at the same pace, but certainly meeting those students where they are, having value added, and getting them to the point where we've created a standard that is purposeful. The third thing that I'd like to talk a little bit about is putting a focus on teachers as the central force for change in the educational system. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to pay educators a sound living wage. And if we do not, if we continue to go in the direction that we are paying them marginal salaries, as we see in our local universities and colleges, we are not getting the kind of people who either come to the educational arena or even stay in the educational arena. In this country, we spend dollars on many, many, many things that we believe that are important. You know, certainly it's important that we defend our country. It's important that we take care of the needy. But somehow, some way, education seems to fall way down on that list of what's important. So until we compensate staff, teachers, educators, the people that work at the school, custodians, cafeteria workers, it is going to be a very difficult situation to keep people who can have an opportunity to build a relationship with students that is long lasting and long living. The next thing is that we need to equalize the share of resources. We need to identify and provide less funded schools, schools that have greater needs, schools that might have more students with disabilities, schools that may have students that come from communities that are in need of support, a way to elevate the learning experience for all students. We may have some students who are very good in the arts. So certainly we need to provide those resources for them, you know, if they are in the visual arts or if they're in the vocal arts, or, you know, looking at the athletics. You know, certainly what goes in the classroom is very important, but we also need to dangle that carrot out there, so to speak, so that the less funded schools are getting the additional resources that they can maintain the services that are needed for that particular school. Again, we're talking about equity and not equal, and justice. As we go to the next slide, we're talking more about paying attention and monitoring the underserved schools and districts to ensure major progress. Before we do anything, we have to acknowledge the inequities that have been long lasting over a period of time. We need to stop calling schools at risk. We need to start calling those schools at promise, because who's to say what a child may be able to do if given the opportunity to have the necessary resources to meet his goals and objectives. You know, no one has a crystal ball. I can remember an experience where there was a young student who was on the volleyball team, was in the band, and was a majorette, and was on the basketball team. And some of those activities crossed over, and she was on the honor roll team. And the staff was fighting over this particular child. And she came to me as a principal and said, look, I want to be a part of some of these things that that I'd like to do, but the people who are the sponsors are telling me that if I do not do this one, that they're going to put me off. So we had a meeting with those individuals and put some pressure on them. And certainly I'm not going to go into this in this particular conversation, but some pressure was put on them so that they could figure out what the plan was to help this young lady, because who was to say, what the crystal ball was going to be in her life? But having the opportunity to do each of them certainly gave her some choices and gave her some access into arenas that were important. Item number 6, I like to call the 3 R's. Those of us who've been around a moment, those of us who I'm going to say are experienced, because certainly I don't know of any lady over 39 years old, so we're just going to say experienced individuals. We used to call those 3 R's reading, writing, and arithmetic. But I like to call those rigor, relevance, and relationships. Certainly we need to make sure that our students have those kinds of things that are important to them and important to their well-being and important to make sure that they can be successful. The goal of education is, simply put, that we want young people to be able to grow and develop and be able to simply take care of themselves and their families in a manner that they have a practical living wage. The relevance of what we teach them has to be something that they are familiar with. And why is it that we're doing this? The video, I think, was very clearly that Dr. Heidel showed with the young man and the individual who was singing. He gave 2 different renditions. One was a very bland rendition because he did the what. But once he got the why, and why was he doing this, then that became very relevant. And we need to give instruction and activities so that our young people understand why it is what they're doing. And last but not least, relationships. When young people see that there are individuals there, whether it's the teacher, whether it's the cafeteria manager, whether it's the custodian, whether it's the clerical, they build relationships and they begin to trust you and talk with you. And if we have schools that just have people who come in, stay a couple of years, and then disappear and go off into the sunset and to the horizon, and in many cases, this is what happens with some of the agencies that are providing education to our students. And yes, you might hear me making reference to Teach for America. I'm not against Teach for America, but when we talk about relationships, certainly we need to have people who are going to stay there with our young people over a period of time and not come and go and leave them in a position where they have to rebuild a relationship and build trust and feel like no one cares about me. The 7th thing is to distinguish between equality and equity. And I think we've made that very clear. And again, the video of the apple tree with inequity, equity, and justice, I think is very clear. But the goal is to make sure that all students have an outcome that meets their needs. Certainly, we look at young people who may have some services because they have a disability, but it may not necessarily just be that disability that's a physical disability or a mental disability. We're talking about barriers that may be in the way of equity as well as equality. So, let's keep that in mind, as we make those decisions about how we service young people. The 8th thing that we'd like to talk a little bit about is to provide a strong education for all, giving priority to early childhood education. I can't stress that anymore. The earlier we get kids in an environment that teaches not only educational services, but also brain development, holistic growth, social skills, early literacy, physical development, as well as enhancing parent effectiveness, because many of our parents who may be very young, and in some cases, those who are a little bit more mature, are not aware of all of the things that educators are aware of to support the needs of their students and our students. So while we're teaching our young people, we're also listening to the needs of our parents and providing them with some support as well. So again, early childhood education certainly is needed for those young people and those communities who have, in many cases, been marginalized. And we need to address that, giving the resources to improve their efficiency academically, socially, morally, and ethically. Number 9, direct resources to students with the greatest needs. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'll use myself for an example, and you saw Dr. Heidel earlier. If we both get a comb, Dr. Heidel certainly can use a comb. A comb doesn't do anything for me, doesn't help me at all. But if someone gave me a towel because my head might be sweating, then that would be something that is a resource that I might need to support my well-being. So again, we're talking about allocating resources to the early grades, target resources to the poorest areas and the most marginalized students, establish policies that and methods that improve the spending efficiency. And last but not least, strengthen the learning assessment systems and implement accountability measures that involve parents and communities. Until we listen to our communities and listen to our parents, and you heard Dr. Heidel say this earlier, not telling them what they need to do, but listening to them and dialoguing with them and making sure that we are hearing what they're saying so that we can develop programs that address their needs. And finally, number 10, set concrete targets for more equity, particularly related to low attainment and dropouts. Now, if we look at the dropout data across the country, we're going to find that, and according to the U.S. Department of Education and the National Center of Educational Statistics, and this is from 2017, there were some 2.1 million dropouts in between the ages of 16 and 24. And there are very little statistics for those people less than 16, but they do exist. And if you break those down and you disaggregate that, you're going to find that Black students and Hispanic students are twice as likely to be a dropout than those who are white. And how do we address that? Well, we have to look at what is it that's the cause of our young people being dropouts. Addressing it very early, addressing the chronic absenteeism, not the what, but why. We need to address the school to prison pipeline. Right now we're spending across this country an average of about $10,000 per child. But if you look at the statistics from 2018, we spend some $88,000 per year per prisoner. Maybe we need to flip that. And maybe we wouldn't have as many prisoners, particularly African-American males, who are the largest population of prisoners. And in most cases, they did not finish high school. They are dropouts. So maybe if we drop in some dollars into our schools, then we won't have the opportunity to drop out and drop in individuals into the correctional centers. And maybe those dollars can be spent in educating our young people and finding careers, and not just jobs, but careers for those individuals. Until we engage the parents and the communities and the businesses and not listen to what their needs are and them listening to us, what our needs are. Education seems to be the only area that everybody tells us what to do simply because they went to school. We went to school and were trained how to educate people. We're professionals just like everybody else. Just like we say professional football, professional boxing, professional this, or professional that. Educators are professionals, and we need to mandate and demand that we be called such. We need to advocate together, because if we stand alone, we're going to get picked off one by one. We need to invest in prevention programs. And last but not least, we need to spend some time in investing in professional development. So as we look at those 10 strategies, and taking a quick look at them, and it's just a quick recap, that if we follow this course, I think that, and Dr. Heidel and I think that we can certainly provide better opportunities for our young people, better schools for our young people to attend. And until we go down that road together, we're going to continue to move in a circle where we're going over and over and over again.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Heidel and Mr. Kilbert. I'm going to ask, and I've written in the chat room for our guests, our participants, to please to begin to prepare the questions that you may have for our speakers. Please type them in the chat room so that we can begin having a very robust conversations with our two phenomenal speakers. I think I'm going to kick off a question as our participants begin to pose their questions. And Mr. Kilbert, I'm going to actually direct this question to you. So as a former superintendent, you probably have a very unique insight as to the thinking that's presently going on in your colleagues' minds as they begin to contemplate reopening schools, be it through hybrid models, through split schedules, as they challenge and begin to think about face-to-face kinds of instructional practices. What are some possibilities that can be applied using some of your equity strategies, given this potential physical distancing that we're experiencing now?
Well, first and foremost, and thank you for that question. First and foremost, we're having this conversation via Zoom, and the question came via Zoom about reopening schools. Yet we want to send students back to school in the course of a pandemic that still is uncertain about the safety and the quality of safety at the school. So until we address, the safety issues, I'm a proponent of making sure that is paramount and prioritized first. But once we get some sense of safety in place, we're going to have to look at several opportunities and several ways to reopen schools. It very well may be that we use a hybrid model initially, where we have what I'm going to call a vertical and horizontal platooning, where it may be that there are some kids who are coming, particularly at the high school. There may be some kids coming in the morning for a shortened schedule, and then some kids coming in the afternoon. And again, before we do that, I have to stress the safety issue of returning to school. There also may be some models that young people will be coming a couple of days a week and providing those kids maybe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, one group of students, and then on Mondays and Wednesdays. Now, there are some very good platforms out there that will allow one group of students to come in and the other group with the ability to address or hear the instruction that's going on via distance learning. Again, here we go again talking about equity issues, because in some areas of the country, having access to the internet is very limited. So that has to be addressed. I know I read somewhere in Austin, Texas, that the school system there worked with the local internet provider, and they put buses all over the city and equip them with internet access, and students across the city of Austin would be able to access distance learning. There are some very good models out there of return to school. Certainly, I would say, safety first. The younger children, need to be protected very carefully. It may be that they are going to have to come to school, but then use the entire school while the older young people are staying at home, because as you know, it's very difficult for parents for young people, kindergarten, maybe first and second grade, to access the distance learning via computer, via tablet, via hotspots. But it may be that, again, coming to school in a safe environment once that has been determined. And last but not least, we may have to stretch the school year out simply because it's not time yet for students to come back to school. I just read somewhere where some 85 kids tested positive who were less than 2 years old. And I believe it was in Florida, 1 in 4 kids who were tested positive. So if we're talking about sending kids back to school in this environment at this point in time, I am not completely for that until we have an environment that's safe for our young people.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kilbert. Dr. Heidel, please join in and share with us the slide that you have presented for us.
Okay, so I just wanted to share this, and it's really, we talked a lot about what we can do and some of the possibilities, and Mr. Kilbert, as he was just talking about scenarios, we just wanted to have like a 5-step kind of a, how do you move this from conversation to actually action? So, identifying the needs, so involving people in the ecosystem in the process. Then how do you know if your environment has the capacity to do the different things that we're recommending? So Mr. Kilbert was just talking about the variations in school systems and student needs. So what does your environment or your community have the capacity to do? And then you need to adapt accordingly. So what you do in District A doesn't work in District B, but making sure you identify things that really work for you. Setting goals. As we said earlier, this is a mammoth kind of a task. Schools and the country has been grappling with issues of equity for centuries now. So set clear and measurable goals, small things where you can experience success and your teams can experience success, and then commit to that. And then when you accomplish it, move to the next thing. What resources are available? So sometimes it's money and sometimes it's time and talent. But what's out there, who's out there to be able to be a thought partner with you and actually roll up their sleeves and get things done? And then actually rolling up your sleeves and getting things done. So just working together to be able to do that. And we just wanted to, before we continue with our question and answers, just kind of remind everyone that, everything seems really big. Like this issue seems massive. And so this quote by Margaret Mead, who's an anthropologist, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And if I had to put my money on a group of people, it would be educators, because they find a way when there is nothing there. And I think that as we continue to communicate and share thoughts and work to strategize on how to make our schools, make the schools that our students need, then I think that we'll really see change. So that was my last little slide.
Thank you both so very much. We have a question that I really believe that both you and Mr. Kilbert can address. You, Dr. Heidel, particularly from the lens of working in colleges and universities. And the question can be posed to you and responded, Mr. Kilbert, from your experience working as a superintendent with pre-K students to 12th grade. So the question reads, is there a suggested roadmap to support the vicarious trauma that will show up in the school community? And the reason that I pose both of you is because you both work with different school communities, but the question is very germane as how trauma shows up. Dr. Heidel?
So I would say there's not a specific roadmap. I think the number one thing the number one step is to admitting that there is trauma. Because I was reading an article when they were talking about the children who were coming to colleges from Chicago and that they experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome. And the author was saying it's not post-traumatic, they're still experiencing trauma because you don't just step away from it and then all of a sudden it's gone. And so I think that that was kind of transformative for me because it made me really think about the fact that students are bringing this with them wherever they go, wherever they land. It comes with them. And so I think acknowledging that is step number one. And then also making a space where students and even faculty, staff, everyone has the space to say, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm not okay. So, because that's another part that's very difficult as it relates to this trauma is that there's shame associated sometimes with whether or not, shame with the fact that you feel burdened or you feel sad or you don't know what to do. And so just letting students and the community know it's okay to say that you're not okay. And then identifying the resources that could support the students and their families when they're trying to navigate this. I think that would be the roadmap that I would suggest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Heidel. Mr. Kilbert, your comments and thoughts.
Immediately after Katrina, which was one of the greatest catastrophes that modern man knows, when we did open schools, when we did return to schools, there were instances that every time it rained, many young people, as well as adults, were traumatized. They were upset. They began to cry because they thought that this was going to be another Katrina. So as Dr. Heidel mentioned, we had to admit and realize that, that there were some traumatic experiences in place. So we ended up putting some additional social workers on staff and some mental health individuals to come in and talk with our young people and their parents and the staff, because the staff too exhibited some traumatic behaviors. And if they could not take care of themselves, how were they going to take care of the students? If parents, and we made it available to parents. So again, having the conversations and being honest and admitting that there are some issues going on, communicating with everyone to let them know, these are the things that we have in place. These are the things that we're doing. What are your concerns as a parent? What are your concerns as a children? We have to be open, we have to communicate, and we have to put professionals in place to address the needs of people once schools open. But again, it's paramount for me to make sure that schools are safe and the health of our young people, the teachers, the staff, everyone that's involved is put first. So again, having the right people in place to address the trauma is certainly the step to take, and putting those people and where parents and the community and the students have access, have immediate access, and not let that fester.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kilbert. Dr. Heidel, you gave some very clear points around equity supports for families. You spoke about policy, you spoke about funding and systemic barriers. As we wait for other participants to enter their questions, could you be a little bit more specific around supports that families can engage in so that they too can begin to understand equity in a deeper manner for themselves, and then how they can navigate current systems so that they can provide the best opportunities for their children and families?
Yes, so when we think about families, so I am really focused on this piece, especially as I think about access to higher education and how students arrive, because I used to oversee programs for first year students. And one of the most disheartening things to see is a student who arrives and they say they're going to be a physics major or engineering major. And then when you ask them what level of math they had two math classes in high school because that's all it was required in their state. And no one told them that you should go all the way to pre-calculus if you have the option. So the parents don't know, the student doesn't know, and then you have to tell them all of a sudden now it's a 6-year degree because you don't have the math, right? And so I think that's an equity issue because the parents are not provided with the information that they need in order to help their children make the decisions that they need to make in high school. So they make choices about class selection because they think that everything is equal, when the reality is everything is not equal, right? And so I think that part of when I'm talking about equity and access, because we know higher education in particular is the biggest lever for social and economic mobility historically, like all the research shows that. But how do we help students and their families understand what it takes to get there, right? And so when I'm talking about empowering families, I'm talking about what are we doing to provide parents, families with the information they need to be able to advocate for their students. So how do you ask the question? So what question do you go to the principal or the curriculum specialist at the school and say, my student wants to do this in college and I need them to be in this class? But what we know, what we see is that there's a power dynamic, right, between families, low-income families, oftentimes families of color, and the different structures. So there's a power dynamic and there's a perception that is inappropriate to be able to ask questions and to challenge placement and these types of things. So that is something that is systemic. And so when I think about equity and helping families, I think about how are we using the PTO or the PTA, the Parent Association, to funnel information to parents about what they can do to position their students to be successful, right? And how do we train families to be advocates for their students and not the school necessarily having to advocate for them? So what are the things that we do in that space that begins to dismantle it doesn't dismantle the structural barriers, but it provides the individual with the tools that they need to be able to advocate for themselves. So that's what I'm thinking about as it relates to families and just making things where information is accessible. So when we're organizing one of my children, their school, the PTO meetings at 10 o'clock on Wednesdays. 10 o'clock on Wednesdays. So if you're having a PTO meeting at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, you don't want all the parents to be there. You want a certain set of parents to be there, right? And so when are we having meetings? Are we providing things on the web? Like, are we creating an app? Like, how are we making the information and access where families can understand? Are we translating things into multiple languages? Do we have someone who can answer questions? So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question completely, but my thought is, a belief is that we have to figure out is how do we, instead of keep saying that there's an achievement gap for students, there's an institution gap, right? So systems are failing students. Students are not failing. And how do we recreate and redesign these systems where they're responding to the needs of the students we have, not the students we're saying we wish we had.
Thank you so very much. You were spot on in answering my question. At this time, I'd like to direct everyone to the chat room. Please note that there is a training evaluation form for you to download. We'd appreciate your downloading it to your device and filling it in immediately and emailing it back to us. I want to remind you that every attendee who submits an evaluation form will receive back a certificate of attendance for this training. If there are no other questions, we just truly want to thank you, Dr. Heidel and Mr. Kilbert, for just bringing to our attention and really taking a deeper dive into creating equity, supports to not only our communities, our own personal lives and spaces that we stand in, but our school communities. So on behalf of the American Federation of School Administrators, Dr. Heidel, Mr. Kilbert, we certainly appreciate your time, your energy, and your passion in this most needed conversation. For those of you that participated with us, we thank you. We want you to stay healthy. We want you to stay well. Remember to just be supportive and know that tomorrow we have day 3 of our summer series, and we look forward to your joining us. I'm going to check the chat room to see if we have any other questions. It appears as if we don't. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you so very much.
Miss Cherry or Miss Barrett, I'm sorry. Hi. Can you hear me, Miss Cherry?
I can hear a voice. I don't know who I'm speaking to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My name is Anya Muntz. I'm just calling because there's a glitch or something with the forms. When you download, it's not saving the information.
If you can type.
Yeah, I did answer it in the chat. What you need to do is do a save as a PDF. So you save it as another file, and that will retain the information you filled in.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so very much, everyone. Tomorrow, I just want to remind you, for those of you that like to participate, our next conversation will be around establishing best practices for continued engagement of members in this time of COVID-19 and beyond. Again, I want to sincerely appreciate and thank you, Dr. Heidel, and Mr. Kilbert, for your passion and for your spending your time sharing with us how we create an equity agenda. Thank you so very much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all very much.